You hear it before you see it. A door slamming shut in a palace corridor. The echo swallows itself in stone, and with it, a silence thick enough to strangle. No cries. No footsteps. No laughter of children allowed to be children. Just silence. Because somewhere in that fortress of marble and gold, a child has been erased, not through death, but through deliberate forgetting. A child of royal blood, born not with a sword in his hand or a crown in her eyes, but with features that did not fit the myth of perfection. The crime? An extra chromosome. A deviation in nature's code that the court scribes dared not name, that physicians whispered about only in private, and that monarchs treated as a curse upon their divine legitimacy. Understand this: power has never been about truth. It has always been about image. Kings claimed they ruled by the will of God, queens claimed their wombs carried destiny itself. But what happens when destiny appears, imperfect? When the heir to divine right shows the gentle almond-shaped eyes, the slower tongue, the different mind of what we now call Down syndrome? In those moments, the entire system trembled. For how could a bloodline claim superiority, how could a family claim to be chosen by heaven, if heaven itself gave them a child they did not want? So they buried the evidence alive. Palaces had their hidden rooms, their sealed wings, their remote estates. Some children were spirited away under the excuse of illness, never to be seen again. Others lived, breathing and dreaming, but as shadows, confined, controlled, and erased from memory while their siblings rehearsed coronations and state dinners. History books do not tell you their names. They were stripped even of that. They exist only in whispers between servants, in half-burned letters, in the tremor of guilt that haunted queens who prayed for mercy while signing away their children's existence. And here is the truth they never wanted you to know: these children were not just victims. They were proof. Proof that the system of bloodlines and divine right was a lie. Proof that perfection is a mask, and behind it, power is terrified of being seen as fragile. You were never meant to hear this. Because once you do, you begin to see the machinery. The way families, institutions, entire empires built on sacred authority, hid their own cracks in the most merciless way imaginable, by sacrificing their children to the silence. Imagine the court of Vienna in the late 18th century. Chandeliers blaze above velvet halls, powdered wigs and jeweled gowns shimmer under candlelight, and every movement is a performance of perfection. But just beyond the gilded doors, down narrow servants' passages that reek of dust and damp stone, lies another reality, one the world was never invited to see. A child of the Habsburg line, born with features that betrayed what they called imperfection, hidden away like a shameful secret. His name was Ferdinand. He was not a bastard. Not an enemy. Not a traitor. He was a son of an emperor. And yet, his existence was treated like a disease that could spread if it were ever acknowledged. Ferdinand was not the first, and he would not be the last. Across Europe, whispers told of other children, born into Bourbon France, into Tudor England, into Romanov Russia, whose only crime was existing differently. Some were locked in estates under the guise of fragile health. Others were written off in ledgers with vague phrases: the weak infant, the simple child, the one who did not thrive. These were codes. Hidden signals within the archives of power. Because to write down syndrome was impossible in those centuries, it had no name yet. But to admit such children existed at all was more dangerous than any war. Royalty was not just family. It was symbol. Every child was a chess piece, a potential treaty, a living banner of divine strength. To reveal weakness in the bloodline was to risk political collapse. If an heir could not rule, could not command armies or sign alliances, the illusion of God's chosen dynasty cracked. Enemies would exploit it. Rivals would whisper. Commoners might begin to question the myth that kings and queens were somehow above them. That was the real danger, truth. So truth was buried. Sometimes gently, with attendants who cared in silence. Sometimes cruelly, with neglect that reduced a child's life to a locked room and cold porridge. And while history remembers the shining coronations, the tapestries, the bloodline stretching back centuries, it forgets the muffled cries of children whose very existence threatened the system itself. But if you listen closely, you can still hear them. In the diaries of grandmothers who visited in secret. In the hidden estates where servants whispered about the quiet prince. In the letters where mothers begged God for forgiveness. It is not history that erased these children. It was power. And power always buries what it fears most. Do not mistake this for mere cruelty. Cruelty is personal. What happened here was systemic, calculated. These children were not just locked away because their parents couldn't bear the sight of them. They were erased because their very existence threatened an empire's psychological stranglehold over its people. Understand the strategy. Monarchies were built not on armies alone, but on symbols. Every portrait, every procession, every christening was a ritual of control. The king's children were not children, they were living propaganda, proof of a bloodline chosen by God, pure and unbroken. The moment a child appeared who did not fit that script, the entire theater of power risked collapse. This is why these children were hidden. They were inconvenient truths. Imagine the impact if the public knew the divine ruler's son could not speak, could not reason, could not inherit. What would happen if peasants realized their king's blood was no more perfect than theirs? That God's supposed chosen could stumble, drool, or fail to recognize a crown from a toy. The illusion would shatter. Faith in the monarchy would corrode. Rebellions would find new fire. So the cover-up became tradition. Locked estates, forged death records, carefully worded diaries. Entire families conspired in silence. The children became ghosts, erased not just from history but from identity itself. They became a form of currency, paid into secrecy to keep power intact. You see, the tragedy is not only that these children were denied love. It is that their existence revealed something monarchs feared more than death: equality. The moment these children were acknowledged, the hierarchy crumbled. And here is the darker truth: this practice of erasure was not confined to kings and queens. Institutions everywhere adopted the same model. Churches, governments, elites, they all understood that symbols must be controlled. If a narrative doesn't fit the myth, it is hidden, buried, destroyed. Whether it is a child in a palace, a document in an archive, or a truth whispered too loudly, the system knows one law: silence the evidence. This is why you were never taught these stories in school. This is why textbooks present perfect portraits of royal families, smiling heirs, powerful dynasties, while the other children, the forgotten ones, never appear. History itself was weaponized, rewritten to preserve obedience. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Because the question emerges: if they could erase their own children to maintain power, what else have they erased to control you? Picture it: a child locked in a forgotten chamber while a coronation unfolds just floors above. The crowd cheers. Trumpets blare. The king presents his heirs to the people, polished, smiling, perfect. And yet, beneath that same roof, his true bloodline is hidden in chains of silence. This is not just cruelty, it is a demonstration of the oldest form of power, the manipulation of perception. The ruler did not need the people to know the truth. He needed them to believe the story. And this is the system that survives today. They learned early that the masses do not follow truth. They follow symbols. They follow images. They follow myths carefully curated to keep them obedient. The royal child born with Down syndrome was never just a family shame. He was a threat to the illusion of superiority. By removing him from view, the monarchy preserved its mask. And masks are the very currency of power. Think about it. Every institution that rules you, whether king, priest, or president, survives by managing appearances. The truth behind the curtain: corruption, weakness, imperfection, must never be revealed. Because once people see that those in power are no different than themselves, the spell breaks. The control collapses. That is why kings erased their own children. That is why governments erase documents. That is why corporations erase scandals. The model is the same, century after century. And the effect on you, even now, is profound. You have been trained to believe in appearances more than reality. Perfect faces on screens. Perfect leaders on podiums. Perfect stories in history books. It's the same deception dressed in modern clothes. You are still standing outside the palace, watching the gilded procession, never being allowed into the darkened chambers where the truth lies shackled. But here's the turning point. The moment you see this pattern, the illusion weakens. You begin to question, what am I not being shown? What truths are being hidden not because they are irrelevant, but because they are dangerous? This question is your weapon. This is the same weapon kings feared centuries ago, that one day their subjects would stop worshipping the mask and start asking about the silence behind it. And this is why I want you to pause, right here, right now, and carve a phrase into your mind. Type it below in the comments twice, to lock it in, I see through the mask. Because the moment you say it, you begin to separate yourself from the machinery. You step out of the illusion. And once you step out, you cannot return. Silence is not empty. Silence is engineered. Those royal chambers where forgotten children languished were not just prisons of stone, they were laboratories. Monarchs discovered something powerful: what you hide shapes minds as much as what you show. By silencing the inconvenient, by erasing what didn't fit the myth, they created a reality where only the chosen narrative survived. And the people believed it. They always do. Understand this: silence is not passive. It is a weapon. When a child is erased from family portraits, it tells the world the dynasty is flawless. When a name is removed from records, it rewrites reality itself. This is psychological warfare at its purest. You don't have to burn every truth, you simply have to keep it unspoken. And in that silence, myths harden into unbreakable chains. Think of the effect on the people outside the palace. They saw perfection paraded in velvet and gold. They never knew the other children existed. They never heard the cries echoing behind stone walls. And so they bowed, they paid taxes, they fought wars, believing they were serving something greater. They believed in the superiority of bloodlines because the alternative was hidden. That is the essence of control, not just giving people what to see, but making sure they never even imagine what they are not shown. Now bring this forward. Your world today runs on the same principle. You are fed the polished images, the success stories, the curated leaders, while the cracks are silenced. Entire industries exist to manage perception, to bury scandals, to control media, to erase dissent. It is the same mechanism perfected by monarchies centuries ago: silence the inconvenient, amplify the illusion. And you, like the peasants who cheered the golden carriages, are conditioned to accept the spectacle as truth. But here's the dangerous insight: silence does not only control nations. It controls men. You were taught never to speak certain truths, never to question certain systems, never to confront your own chains. You were trained to self-censor, to bury your own doubts, to silence yourself before the system ever had to. That is how deep the machinery runs. It is no longer outside of you. It is inside. The royal child in the locked chamber is not just history. He is a mirror. A symbol of every truth you've been conditioned to bury. And until you face that silence, within and without, you remain exactly where they want you: obedient, distracted, asleep. The erasure of royal children was never an isolated cruelty, it was a blueprint. What began in palaces became doctrine. Monarchs discovered that hiding imperfection preserved their divinity, and institutions learned quickly: control is not about conquering bodies, it is about conquering perception. Churches, governments, secret councils, all of them adopted the same strategy. Silence became the most sacred law. Think of the Church. For centuries, it claimed to be the voice of God on earth, untouchable, infallible. But what happens when priests sin, when popes fall into corruption, when human weakness contaminates the sacred throne? The truth was buried. Records burned. Whispers silenced. Whole libraries vanished overnight, not because they lacked value, but because they held value too dangerous to be known. Just like the forgotten royal child, inconvenient truths were locked away in vaults, rewritten as heresy, or erased entirely. Governments followed the same path. Official documents vanish. Witnesses disappear. Wars are fought on lies rewritten as noble causes. Even today, when you hear leaders speak of freedom, democracy, or destiny, you are hearing echoes of the same stage play that once presented perfect royal heirs while hiding the forgotten ones. The machinery has evolved, but the principle has not changed. The image must be preserved at all costs, while the truth is smothered in silence. And do not miss this, the elites understood that silence is not just about hiding the child, the scandal, or the weakness. Silence is about training the masses to never ask. If a people no longer questions, if a man no longer doubts, then the silence sustains itself. The cage doesn't even need guards, because the prisoner polices his own thoughts. This is the psychological chokehold you live under now. You are given distractions, narratives, endless noise, but never the dangerous silence that asks, "What am I not being told?" You are kept busy with shadows while the real truths rot in locked rooms. That is how entire civilizations are programmed. Not through whips, not through chains, but through the absence of questions. And here lies the terrifying parallel: the fate of those royal children was not just a family tragedy. It was a prototype. A method. A rehearsal for how power could manipulate entire populations into obedience, generation after generation. And if you think you are free of it today, remember this: you are standing outside the palace, cheering for illusions, while the truth waits, locked away, watching. Now you see the pattern. From royal chambers to modern governments, from silenced children to erased histories, the method has never changed. They survive by managing your sight. By deciding what you are allowed to see, they decide what you believe. And by controlling what you believe, they control what you obey. That is the oldest magic of power, not swords, not armies, but illusion. But here is where the danger turns personal. Because once you know this, you can no longer claim ignorance. You can no longer bow to the parade and pretend not to hear the muffled cries behind palace walls. You begin to see masks everywhere, in politics, in religion, in media, in your own life. The truth was never destroyed. It was buried. And now it is rising before you. The tragic fate of royal children born with Down syndrome was not just a story of neglect. It was the skeleton key to understanding how power protects itself, by erasing what threatens it. Those children revealed the fragility of divine bloodlines, so they were silenced. Today, truths that threaten governments, corporations, or ideologies are silenced the same way. Not because they are irrelevant, but because they are lethal to the illusion. And here is the turning blade: you, right now, are faced with a choice. Do you remain among the crowd, clapping at the spectacle, obeying the narrative, safe in ignorance? Or do you step into the forbidden chamber, confront the silence, and claim the knowledge they never wanted you to have? Understand, knowledge is not comfort. It is responsibility. Once you see through the mask, you are no longer controlled by it, but you also can never return to the blindness of before. This is the identity shift. The line you cross in silence, when you decide you are not one of the obedient. You are one of the awake. And the awake man is dangerous, not because he fights with weapons, but because he sees what others refuse to see. So hear this, and write it below to seal it in blood and algorithm both: I walk into the forbidden chamber. Say it twice. Mark yourself. Because the moment you claim it, you are no longer theirs. You belong to truth. And truth, once chosen, burns away every illusion. Forever.